Is your soil competing with your plants for nutrients? We're talking about the potassium paradox on this episode of Blueprint to Yield. Hey everyone, Mike Evans here with Calibrated Agronomy, here with Jared Cook, our man from Idaho, and got a special guest all the way from California, Jim White with Soil Basics. And guys, we're talking about the potassium paradox. Jim, you want to kind of explain that for our listeners?
So it's a situation where your soil is competing with your plant for nutrients, and potassium is one of those that's extremely doing that. In nature, there's equilibriums that are maintained, and once you upset equilibrium, it has to rebalance itself. And potassium is one of those in the soil that will do that. And so you can apply large amounts of potassium to the soil and see no response, because the soil will take that and put it into an equilibrium, back into that. And each soil will do it a little differently based on the makeup of the soil particles.
So Jared, have you seen that in real life? Where you're working with growers or consulting?
Yeah, it's real. It's absolutely real. I think it's more prevalent on higher clay percentage soils. Sandy soils is probably a little bit different, but anytime you get into some higher CEC soils, 18, 19 CEC plus, maybe even 16 might be a threshold number, in all honesty. But yeah, it's real. We see that often.
Yeah. So we were talking before we got on air here a little bit, kind of prepping for this. And one of the comments I got written down here, it says modern day farming has accepted major inefficiencies.
Oh yeah, buddy. Oh buddy.
In our nutrient applications. Yeah. So walk us through that. I don't know anyone can talk to that, but just.
Well, I'd start by saying the soil is a very expensive storehouse for your nutrients. And so when you go out in the fall, the potassium specifically.
Yep.
When you're applying, say you're applying 100 pounds of ODOT 60, 60 units of K and 42 pounds of chloride.
Yep.
When you put that 60 in, are you getting 60 back out? And most often, no, that we don't. We don't get that out. What goes in is not always what comes out. And I think it ties back to what Jim's talking about on this potassium paradox. The soil is a formidable opponent to those minerals. And based on the equilibrium, it wants to have a certain arrangement of mineral composition. And it's going to adsorb or desorb minerals to get to that equilibrium.
So Jim, like in this potassium paradox, for us, we're at Kelly's farm here. Potassium's always been kind of a struggle in our 100% no-till system, and put on potash, never really saw anything. So we've actually cut it out of application for it. And I feel like our potassium numbers in certain situations have been either on par or elevated because of that. By cutting that out of our operation, have we kind of solved the potassium paradox here, or are we doing something else?
Well, you might not have solved it, but you're at least working in a direction that's maybe a little better for you. So there was work done in the 80s by Unical that showed that if you can picture a triangle, and just to use round numbers, at the top of the triangle for your soluble potassium in your soil solution, it would be 1%. And on your exchange sites, which is your soil colloids on the exchange sites, would be 9%. And then you'd have 90% that's inert, that's actually part of the clay particle or the soil matter. And so that you can see that 1%, 9%, 90%, when you put a pound on 1% of that, or 100 pounds, 1% goes to solution, one goes to 9% on the exchange site, and one goes to 90% soil colloidal material. So you can see your inefficiency is low when you're making your application. So the time of uptake is what your application on active growing plants, what solubilizes in that first 7 to 14 days is all that you get into the plant. The rest will be reorganized as the soil dries down into that 1, 9, and 90%. So you can see that 90% you're probably not going to get. But in keeping the equilibrium, on each soil, it's different. Like Jared said, sandier soils are more available. Clay soils are you going to put more on to match all those that particle sizes and particle density. So once you break the equilibrium, the potassium will free up. So if you're irrigating and you put in on our soils, a Hanford sandy loam soil, 3.5 pounds of potassium will break the equilibrium or satisfy it. The plant will start to pick up potassium, and the soil will backfill that during the irrigation. But once the irrigation's done, the soil dries down, it goes back to that equilibrium. So an application will always go back within 7 to 14 days to that equilibrium. So if the plant hasn't accessed it in that time, it's not going to get most of it. So you can put 250 pounds of potassium SOP as an example on your soil, water it. If the plant, whatever the plant doesn't pick up, it goes back to that 1:990 ratio, and you can see how you're not getting much out of it. If your plant's not active, say you put it on pre-plant as a broadcast, then you haven't picked up anything.
So like,
you've only got what is that 1% that's in solution, or that 9% on exchange site.
yeah. So like we're here in Western Iowa. I would say most of our potassium, I'm going to put a number probably on it, like 80% of our potassium goes on in the fall after the combines.
Yeah.
So listening to you, we're waiting when we need potassium, Jared, like we're in late June right now till the crop probably senesces, right?
Yeah, you got pretty massive uptake curve, like starting right now.
Yeah.
Till the end of the season.
So we're banking on spreading in October, waiting how many months till June?
Yeah, 6 months, 7 months.
And what Jim just explained, that's not a really good return on investment. Is it?
They may never see it.
It's kind of like there's the analogy used earlier about, we're trying to fill this cup in the soil with potassium, and we're doing it with a 5-gallon bucket. Well, we can pour that 5-gallon bucket's clear full of water. Yep. We go to pouring. Man, as soon as that cup's full, we're happy. But what happened to all the rest of the water in that 5-gallon bucket?
Yep.
We don't care about that. I think that stems back to the statement you made about the inefficiencies that we've come to accept.
Yeah. No, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. When fertilizer was cheap, it wasn't as big a deal. But the reality is it's not cheap. But it's never going to be.
I think it goes back to what you led in with is the soil's expensive storehouse. Yeah. And that's kind of the philosophy, at least in the Midwest, that I grew up with, was like you're putting it into the bank account.
Right.
But what's that bank account returning? Nobody ever really talks about that, right? Is that a good way to look at it?
It's a great way to look at it, yeah.
I've put this many dollars in my bank account, I'm going to get, 1% return on it?
Pretty
much, yeah. Not so good, Mike. Not so good.
That's not good. Yeah. So I'm a farmer or a consultant like we do, Jared.
Yeah.
And, okay, I listen to this. I'm like, Potassium Paradox. I'm interested now. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
And how to make my potassium more efficient is basically what we're trying to figure out here, right?
Yep.
So, like Jim, so what have you done to kind of not solve, but work with this potassium paradox?
So that paper that was written and that research was done at a time just prior to when drip irrigation became popular. And so that method or that information was kind of put on the shelf, and they went to more banding so that you're overloading the exchange sites to keep potassium more available to the plant. And so in our area, we did a lot of banding. We did a lot of applications in that. But as drip comes along, now you're looking at more efficiency of applying it during the crop season to the crop. And so you can put that in right into an active root system, and your uptake will be a lot better. There's other information on how much the plant can actually take up in one irrigation. There are plateaus where it flatlines. And so if you're putting more than that on, you're wasting it pretty much. So, so we've gone to, and most of ours is drip system. We're going low rates through the water is the most efficient way, or foliar sprays at times to bridge that. We also do, we come up with combinations of things, some acid blends, let's say, to acidify to bump. You can always bump potassium off by applying calcium, or ammonia will bump potassium and get that to move. And then the soil will make that equilibrium again. So it will take changeable potassium and put in solution. It will also take colloidal potassium and move it to exchangeable. So you can get that flow that way. But most of your potassium, there's been podcasts on it where potassium carbonate is what is in the plant tissue and is very soluble. It leaks out of the corn plant, and then the rains wash it off the plant back onto the soil. So your top foot of the soil is always getting kind of recycled or rebuilt from your soil. So there's information on that too.
So you made an interesting statement in that, explaining that, Jared. I think it's kind of interesting. He talks about putting calcium or ammonium on the soil to release potassium. And I think, for me here, we've spent a lot of time with Kelly on calcium just because of their soils. Yeah. And I think we've seen that because we've applied calcium to our soils, more available calcium on our soils. And I don't see our potassium numbers fall off either. So do you do that out west? Do you use other nutrients to help that paradox triangle equilibrium Jim's talking about? Or what other methods are you using to solve this problem?
No, that's a very good point. That's using chemistry to advantage, right? You're using a 2+ charge calcium to bump off a 1+ charge potassium. So as you use calcium to manipulate your cation exchange capacity a little bit, as you increase that soluble calcium, it naturally forces potassium off the colloidals, the CEC site, because I think it's pretty weakly held. It's not a strong bond. And so that's one strategy. But the other side of calcium is it improves soil structure, flocculation. Oftentimes, a lot of our potassium, when clay is hydrated, look at it in layers. You got these different layers that start to separate when clay is hydrated. That allows access to more real estate, more surface area. When clay's dried down, they tighten up. And so a lot of times your potassium is just locked. It's locked between, if this hand's a clay layer and this hand's a layer, but with the middle we've got potassium, and that clay dries, it's locked in there. We physically can't access it. It's like putting your guns in the vault and you lost the password to the vault.
Yep.
I can't get my gun.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the reality of it. So as we increase soluble calcium in the soil solution, that helps to restore and rebuild soil structure. So now we're accessing more of that clay real estate that's in the soil.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And we found that instead of putting potassium on late season to finish crops, using calcium to reflocculate that soil, because you kind of lost calcium as you go through the season. It's better for your microbiology because you're adding air into the soil. You can run nitrogen cycles by doing that. And then also it's more of a natural process of bumping the cations off the exchange sites rather than just putting more in on top of it. So it's a better finish. Potassium is usually considered a vegetative nutrient, where calcium is more of a reproductive nutrient.
Right.
And so that also helps you finish at the end.
It's almost counterintuitive.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because if you're doing any kind of tissue sampling or wheat sap analysis,
right,
plant sap analysis, you see a problem, and you're gonna go, I need to put if I'm potassium deficient, I'm gonna go put potassium on. Right. But you guys seen success by going after the calcium piece to unlock your potassium in your soil.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a number of companies, and we've done this quite a bit over the years. It gets a little noisy doing this, but you can run a total chemical extraction on your soil to get like the total content of what's your nitrogen load, potassium, phosphorus, calcium. And usually when you do that, you'll see that you have 18,000 or 30,000 pounds of potassium out in these soils.
Yep.
Well, if that's the case, why am I fertilizing? Well, but to Jim's point, that 30,000 pounds or 18,000 pounds, whatever it is, it's locked up in non-exchangeable forms. And so as we improve soil structure, soil tilth, air-water relationships, as we improve microbial activity in the soil, all of those things help us access some of that fixed fraction.
Yeah, and there's there's products that you have and that Jared's used and we've used that you can take a soil sample and use that product in a dilution ratio that you would apply and use that as an extract, as your extract on that sample to see what that application might show up on a release of nutrients. So when you're releasing calcium or acidifying, let's say, and you're releasing calcium, you're going to bump ammonia. So you're running a nitrogen cycle, which will bump potassium and bump magnesium.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a natural process of accessing what's in your soil. And that finishes it a lot better than putting just straight potassium on. So calcium and organic acids to run the system if you're using some microbiology, or your soil's got a lot of microbiology and you could do that.
Yeah, it's just it's fascinating to me that, to Jared's point, and we've done it here on this farm, where you've got so much mineral in the soil that we just can't access or don't know how to access, and just talk, listen to you guys talk about ways to be efficient in accessing what you have in the soil. I think it really helps. And I mean, as a grower listening to this or a consultant, they're sitting here going, well, I'm too afraid to cut out my fall potassium. What do I do? I mean, I see the problem. I, kind of agree with what you guys are saying.
Yep.
And they're not like Kelly and I, where they're just going to completely stop doing it.
Right.
Because I mean, that's a scary subject to some people.
Right.
I mean, what advice would you give somebody listening to this? What's the path to solving this paradox in your farm?
Mike, I think I would recommend if somebody's on the fence about implementing this strategy, cut whatever you're applying in the fall, cut it in half. Say you're putting out 100 units of K in the fall, cut it to 50. Allow yourself to have access to 50 units of potash for in-season management and start that way. And you'll quickly start to see that I don't need that 50 in the fall. I need it in season. Because that's the time frame. Put potassium on in a period of time where the demand is ramped up. Because right now, here you are, you're going to roll into your, it's almost vertical uptake for a period of time on this corn, to the point where you're going to probably consume between 7 and 10 pounds of soluble potassium a day to feed the demand of that crop, especially where you guys are pushing such high yield.
Yep.
Here's the deal. If your soil can't supply that, what good did it do to put all that the potassium out in the fall? We need it in the time of peak demand. And so for your Y drop applications, foliar applications, fungicide rides, whatever, anytime you can add a few extra units of potassium here and there, you're going to have a massive ROI. That's my gut feel.
Yeah, you can look at your soil analysis and look at the millcounts per liter of potassium that's in solution. So you'd have your calcium, your magnesium, potassium and sodium usually in that window, and see what your soil will give up. So most of our soils in our area are only giving up 0.2 millcouloments. But what we look for, even if you're purchasing property, like for table grape plantings or whatever, you look at those soils that give up a 0.5 or a 0.6, then your potassium's more available. If you're at a 0.2, then even if you're putting it on, that soil's going to tie it up. And so maybe using a foliar with a biostimulant to activate the metabolism and stimulate the biology and root flush, will help you pick up more potassium out of your soil also.
Jim, I got a question for you. Sorry to steal your thunder there, Mike, but
Sorry.
We got the legend here, Jim, right? So we gotta use this to our advantage. Using the mill equivalent values is one testing method. What if you were looking at like the rapid soil saturation paste extract? How would you navigate that type of soil test to understand your available nutrient?
So you could take your parts per million. Mm-hmm. I think those are listed in parts per million.
Parts per million.
parts per million, do a math equation on figuring out how much potassium you're actually getting. And then, so let's say on your millquarts per liter or your parts per million, if you're, what would be a number that you would use off of that?
Probably 15 parts per million on a rapid soil.
So 15 parts per million, you could do the math on that. Usually you do times 1.2 times 4.
Mm-hmm.
That gives you pounds per acre foot.
So if I'm a 0 to 6 inch sample, I'd times it by 1.2 or 2. 2 parts per million would be a simple math figure.
Yeah,
right?
so K2O would be 1.2 times 2 for 6 inch.
Yeah.
That gives you how many pounds. And then there is information back from that paper in the 80s. It's available, and I'm sure people have done more work from that time. So then if you have so many pounds on like a Hanford sandy loam, which is what's mainly in our area, it takes 3.5 pounds to break the equilibrium.
Oh, yeah.
So if you have 1 pound, let's say, in solution, then if you add 2.5 pounds of potassium, you meet that equilibrium. So you would go apply a product that would give you, like KTS gives you 3 pounds. Some of the products we have, potassium carbonates, has 3 pounds per gallon.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a 0.5 pound and you apply 3, you're at 3.5, you break the equilibrium.
Right.
The potassium will go into the plant and the soil will release during that irrigation to keep that equilibrium, to backfill it. So in clay soils and like Washington on potatoes, you may need 6.5 pounds up to 9 pounds.
Right.
So you can do the math on that. So there are equations you can work through that and see what to do.
See, that's where I've seen when, like our potato production in Southern Idaho, it's about 7.5 pounds per day.
Yeah.
It's
and there's soil, a lot of soils can't release that much.
Yeah.
That goes in my next question. So I'm a grower sitting here. You know, we're in Iowa. We got all the fertility in the world. At least everybody thinks that, right? So, but I'm a grower and I'm looking at my Malik 3 test that I get from anywhere. You know, it's a pretty popular soil extraction test. And say my optimal level there is 200 parts per million on my Malik 3.
Yeah.
And I got 80 parts per million. Well, my Malik's telling me I don't have enough exchangeable potassium in the soil. I need to apply something. But you guys are telling me that if I apply this, I'm going to create another, or I'm not being as efficient.
Right.
How does the guy manage that piece? Is it more just diagnostics like you say, Jared? Go find out what that whole storehouse is? What's the path for somebody like that?
I think the path is most growers know their farms. They know that rhythm and flow most of the time. But I do think we can do better. So I think to really navigate and dissect the scenario you've just laid out, you've got to have more detail. You got to have more frequency of plant sampling, whether it's tissue or sap or whatever method you're running. You got to have that to be your guide, as to show you when the plant's really demanding that potassium value. Because who's to say you don't have 80 parts per million from your Malik 3, but that soil it's a liberator. It's a potassium liberator, man. It just gives it freely. So in that case, maybe the university standards are inaccurate. And so I think it comes down, I think it's a site-specific decision-making piece. I don't think we can bank that on a generality. This field here might be different from one 15 miles down the road. Yep. And I think we need more data to really decipher what that actually looks like.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons you want microbiology in your program, and you want to support microbiology in your program, because it's times like that they're helping you solubilize. So if you can increase plant metabolism, you're going to increase root exudates, which is going to help activate that microbiology that you've been working to support. And that microbiology then is helping to root flush, and those exudates will start to solubilize more of that potassium as it goes into the soil. And so that can help bridge that gap, if you will. And foliar potassium with a biostimulant or something to stimulate metabolism would be a good play on that.
Absolutely. Mike, I got a question for you.
Yep.
Iron Mike, yeah. Jim just triggered a thought in my mind. When you go pull a soil sample out here, you're picking up the soil. But what about the massive amount of residue that's left on the soil surface that's chock full of potassium? What do you think the recommended, like the nutrient removal in the corn stover? If I'm not mistaken, it was upwards of like almost 180 pounds of potassium in the stover. You guys are leaving that on the soil surface, right?
Yep.
Is that accounted for in the soil sample?
No, never really.
Never.
And I'll trump you on that. So we did a project a long time ago over in central Iowa with a cellulosic ethanol plant got up, and they took the stover off.
Yeah.
And they were trying to get it off the ground and promising growers a lot of things to get the thing running. And I don't know how many bales it took. It took a lot. And one of the agronomists at the time asked the farmer how much they were getting for it. And he's like, well, I don't know. Nothing really. They're just kind of running a project. And he's like, well, you're losing a lot of fertility. To your point, he poured out those bales. Yeah. And it's a lot more than what you just laid out.
All right.
So yeah, this stover back here and how we, and
you guys keep talking. You guys keep talking. I'm going to do some cowboy math.
We've built that into our program here at Kelly's. And to Jim's point, I was like, we'll go down the microbiology wormhole a little bit too, is we want to cycle, that's a big buzzword too, cycling your residue and nutrients in there. And I think it's important to breaking that down and getting it back in the system. Because we always go back to, I think it's in Neil Kinsey's book, once a nutrient's uptake by a plant, it's the next time it's 10 times more available to the next plant.
Right.
Because and that's always fascinated us here when we talk about it. So cycling that residue has got a lot of benefits, but that nutrient cycling is important.
It's critical. Well, and Jim shed some light on the form of potassium that's in the plant, potassium carbonate.
Yep.
Very soluble, very active, very available. How many tons of residue do you suppose is out there?
Say 2.
2 ton?
Even number.
I went 4, so I'll reduce my standards for you, Mike. So in 2 tons of corn stover, you have 80 pounds of potassium, predominantly probably in the potassium carbonate form, which is going to leach through that residue pretty quickly once it starts to really give up that lignin cellulose.
Yeah. I was thinking per bale, so it's probably higher than that.
Let's go back to 4.
Yeah, go back to 4.
Yeah,
so it's 160.
See, we should have went with my original number in the beginning. That's 160 pounds of potassium in the residue. So if you have residue that you can go out there and visually identify from 2 years ago or 3 years ago or even last season that's not rapidly breaking down, you got a pile of potassium sitting there. That's that 5-gallon bucket that's being poured to fill this cup, and we're losing all the rest of the biomass, the water. It's right there. So I love what Jim's sharing about, having all of the cycle working in your favor, from the biological to the chemical to the physical aspects of the soil. They all need to function properly to combat this potassium paradox.
And your programs that you run in the fall or post-harvest on breaking down that residue in the soil, those residues become now weak exchange sites for all the minerals. And so you will retain some of that potassium as it becomes soluble during the winter or into the spring before planting. That will stay on those exchange sites, which are organic matter. So you have soil exchange sites, but you also have organic matter as an exchange site for ammonia and other nutrients. So your fall application, and I'm not trying to throw that under the bus, of potassium may be better spent in trying to break down your residues and use those as exchange sites to hold more of that you're breaking down.
I think that's good advice, Jim.
So, as turning your fall program over its head, really.
Yeah.
So if your potassium management program at your farm, start with the residue. This is basically what you're saying, Jim. Start working on that, spend those dollars on that, and then go into in-season management, like Jared's saying, following it, and then the application methods you guys laid out would be more efficient than the $50 we're spending in the fall.
Yeah, and then support your biology, support the interaction between your microbiology and the plant, and that relationship, and that will carry you a long way. And then supplement maybe with foliars or some biostimulants to move that at times that you need it.
It's good stuff. He's Jared Cook, and our guest with Jim White. I'm Mike Evans. If you got any more questions on the potassium paradox, give us a holler at calibrateyouragronomy.com, and we'll see you next time on Blueprint to Yield.